We're now joined by Cal State Long Beach professor Jason Whitehead. Thank you so much for joining us again. What is your response to the president? He never mentioned former President Donald Trump by name, but he kept calling him out for not just being a former president, but a defeated former president.
Yeah, I think, there were a lot of attempts to make sure that the people know who was to blame for these actions and who was to blame for the events of January 6th. There was a lot of discussion about the lies and about the counter narrative, the truth that Biden was correct about, right? So there's a lot of attempts to correct the record of history and to defend American democracy. But the truth, he says, the truth will set you free. And so one of the things that you have to think about with regard to truth is policy. So what are we going to do in response? And what I noticed, one of the biggest glaring omissions, I think, in the speech, which was addressed by the vice president, was the laws that Congress, that the House of Representatives passed, that the Senate is not going to pass because of the polarization in the Senate. So how do you deal with that? What are you going to do about these new state laws that are setting us up for a 2022 and a 2024 that's driven by the same lies that the president rightfully called out in that speech?
Professor Whitehead, the president said something that stood out for me when he said, quote, "You can't only love the country when you win. You can't obey the laws when it's convenient." Who is he talking to?
Yeah, I mean, he's talking to the president and he's talking to the Republican Party. And I think in large part also talking to Republican voters who have been really susceptible to the narrative that he discussed. And I think he was really compelling on that narrative. The problem is that the people that he's talking to are the people that are the least likely to listen to a president of the United States, especially a president elected by a process that they see as illegitimate. And so how do you overcome that? We're well past the days where a president can give a primetime address and have all of the country unite behind him. I think our social media, our normal lives are too fragmented for that, and we're driven by too many counter narratives that are rampant throughout the land.
Misinformation that we're getting.
Yeah, I think he's trying to speak directly to Republican voters who are susceptible to the big lie. The question is, again, what are you going to do about social media? Right? That's another policy area that was not addressed by either Vice President Harris or President Biden.
And Republicans, politicians at first condemned the attacks, but as we've said and we saw in the special report, they've since walked back those remarks, appealing to the narrative that has been put out there. How do we bridge this partisan divide? Like you said, a lot of Republicans who think that it was a stolen election probably turned the channel when they saw him, take the podium. How do we change that? Do we have stiffer laws on places like Facebook? That's where I see the most misinformation.
Wow, I wish I knew the answer to that question. But here's one thing that I could say is that you need leadership in the Democratic Party. You need bipartisan leadership if you can get it. I don't know if you can get it, but you at least need leadership at the presidential level and at the congressional level to begin having these discussions and begin having town hall meetings, begin touring the country and listening to people talk about their experiences with the lies that were told in the lead up to the 2020 election and the lies that are still being told out there. So I don't know how exactly to regulate social media, but I do know that there is bipartisan support for doing it. A lot of Republicans in the lead up to 2020 were talking about regulating social media. Now, their proposals are not going to be the same as Democratic proposals, but there's one area where the president wants to work with Republicans. He wants to work across the aisle. He wants that to be his legacy. That's an issue, I think, on which you can get some bipartisan agreement, and we can have some leadership and some new ideas going forward.